Okay, good morning to everyone. My name is Haris. Yeah, let me shortly introduce myself. My name is Haris. I'm a PhD student of the group. Surprisingly today I replace Professor Wolf for this lecture. Normally, I'm gonna be your tutor for the last part of the course, but yeah, additionally today I'm gonna do the lecture. So I tried to adjust the style of the lecture in the style of the course somehow, but yeah, still, I'm not so well prepared as Verena is every time, and it's gonna be a bit more relaxing, but I hope I convince you for some things. And feel free to interrupt me whenever you want. I have no problem. On the contrary, I like it, so we can make it more alive. Yes, so last time we talked about mainly about moment closure of a continuous time Markov chain. Essentially, we started by defining what is a system of guarding commands, which essentially means you have a state, and this state has some variables, and for each of the variables you define some conditions in order to see what is the transition that you're going to take next. To each of the transitions you define additionally some probabilities, and at the end you have a system of guarding command, a special case of which is what we consider as the chemical reaction network, which we have seen a lot in the course, and we're going to study also in the sequence. So after defining the system of guarding commands and chemical reaction network as a special case of it, we define once more the master equation, which means what's the ODE system that we need to solve, either numerically or analytically. Most of the times we have to do it numerically because of the of the size of the state space, in order to find our transient solution for the Markov chain that we're interested in. And what we saw last time specifically was how to derive the so-called moment equation, the general form of which is this one here, from the master equation. So Verena made the proof, and she proved this formula here, which essentially says that the derivative of the expectation of some function of our state vector at time point t equals the sum over all possible reactions of the expectation of this strange thing here, which looks strange in the first sight, but it's not so hard to understand if you look a bit more carefully on it. So what this huge expectation goes over is the transition rates of each reaction for the state that we are, multiplied with this difference. This difference is the function that we have defined, evaluated for the descendant of our state xt, minus the function that we have defined, evaluated for the state xt. And this difference here, if we're talking about the concrete example of the chemical reaction network, is just the state vector. So at the end here you have a constant, which is a state vector vi, like the difference to go from one state to the other, which of course can go out of the of the expectation here, because the expectation goes over all xt, and this is a constant. Okay, so this one is the general form of the moment equations, simply because if you replace the function f with a power of the state vector x, then you get e to the x, e of x to the power of something, and then here on the right hand side you get an equation for this derivative, for the derivative of the non-central moment. This is called non-central moment, or raw moment. And if you have, for instance, x to the k, it's the kth non-central moments that you get solving this ODE system. Okay, the problem now is, we saw also a particular example. The problem comes from this thing here, when this function is not linear, right? So we saw that when this function is not linear, then essentially we have an expectation of usually a product here, let's say, for instance. And the thing is, you have an expectation of something that you don't know because you don't have on the left side of the ODE system. So one approach is to try to solve it and set up an ODE system, also because we said function f is pretty general, so one approach is to set up an ODE system also for this product, let's say here. But then this, what happened is that in the right hand side you will get another expression, probably a product of three products, how you say? Okay, yes, of three parts, which is the third moment, and again you will not know it and you will have solved it, and this goes up to infinity. So the thing is, if these functions are not linear, this rate function is not linear, then you have to close the system at some point, and this is called moment closure. So you decide that after some moment you just equate it to 0, and then you have a closed system, and that which you can solve, and of course you're going to take an approximate solution at the end. Okay. Yeah, and also Verena talked to you a little bit at the end about what is called hybrid approach, which is, I mean, so the normal moment approach comes with a drawback many times that it cannot capture many modes of the system, which means that if you have only one mode, like let's say the distribution is close to your normal one, we said that the first two moments are enough in order to capture this distribution. But if the distribution of your system looks something like this one, which has two modes, like two peaks here, two different normals, let's say, then it's not enough, of course, to consider just the two moments, and probably it's not enough to consider even more moments. So what you have to do is to consider something that is called conditional moment, which means like if your system has two modes, let's say you have this gene reaction networks where your gene is either active or non-active, and based on this decision you get different mode of your system, so you get different peak on your distribution. Then you have to consider the conditional moments conditioned on the mode of the system, so conditioned on the state of the gene, and this is the hybrid approach. But I don't think we're going to study this in the lecture, just for your information. Okay, so at the end, Verena also talked a little bit about discrete event simulation, but yeah, which is a more general case. I mean, the Markov chain comes again as a special case of the discrete event simulation, because essentially the difference in the discrete simulation is that the waiting time in each state is not exponentially distributed as a Markov chain. It doesn't have the memoryless property. Yeah, but I guess this is going to come in the next lecture. So what I'm going to talk today about is the so-called complex networks, or when topology matters, right here. Okay, so this is an example we have seen somewhere in the beginning of the lecture. It's a closed biological compartment with n different chemical species, which can react each other. The basic assumption there was that every species can react with every other species, which means here you have 1, 2, 3, 4 different species, and then you say that each molecule of this species can react with every other molecule of any other species. So you consider the system is well steered. After doing this assumption, we derive these equations here. Yeah, I guess you all know how to derive these equations, kind of. So what we did is to to define the vector chains, which means the chains for each reaction. Like here, like the columns here refer to the reactions, and the rows refer to the species. We have a certain enumeration of the species, E, S, C, and P. And this row here essentially expresses the chains of species E from the first reaction, where we see we lose one. We lose one of species E in the first reaction, we gain one in the second reaction, and we gain also one in the second reaction. So it's -1, 1. Okay. And the same we do for all species. And that's how at the end we define this system of ODEs, which you see here, by considering simply how can we gain a molecule of species E, or how can we lose one. So here, this expression considers all the reactions and their rates, where we can gain one species E, like this, as we said, is the second and the third reaction, and the rate of this reaction is the constant rate of this, which is K2 times Xc, which is what can react here alone, plus from the first reaction K3 times Xc again. And the way to lose a molecule of species E is by the first reaction, where the rate of which is minus K1 times Xc times Xs. And the same we do for all reactions, and we define this ODE system. So by now, like back then we said that the argument to define this ODE system was that, okay, every molecule can react with every other molecule, so the reaction rate of this reaction is going to be simply the population of E times the population of S. By now, maybe you understand after the last lecture that this ODE system is nothing else than the mean field, right? Than the mean field of the corresponding continuous time Markov chain that would be defined by a state vector, like state population vector that has the populations of its species. And it's a mean field because here these are averages values, like all the variables here are average values. And of course we do this linear assumption that we said. So here normally you have an expectation of K1 Xc times Xs, and implicitly what we say here is that this expectation is just the product of the two expectations, right? So this ODE system that we have seen is nothing else than the mean field. Alex, can I go back? Can I scroll down somehow with the pen?
Yes.
Or like this here?
Yes, like this.
Okay. Apart from the chemical reaction networks, we have seen also another example at some point. It was about the susceptible and infected. So this is called SIS model, susceptible, infected, susceptible. And we have done there the same assumption, that the system is simply well steered, which means that so this you can consider now there are humans, okay? So this means that every human, no matter if he's infected or susceptible, can interact with every other human here. And the dynamics are gonna be defined according to this assumption. And the same way, we have set up our equation system. Based on the argument that everyone can interact with everyone. And then we said that the rate for the, so we have here, we have two reactions, R1, or rules, you can call them as you want, S plus I. Yeah, sorry for my handwriting. So the first rule says that a susceptible node interacts with an infected, and then both of them get infected. And the second says that just spontaneously an infected node becomes susceptible, right? And based on the same argument that we said before, we have defined the rate of the first reaction as, so let's call this K of infection, let's call this K of an infected node that becomes susceptible. And we've said that the reaction rate of this, of the first reaction, is gonna be simply the constant rate here times the population of infected times the population of susceptible. For the second reaction, we just need to consider the population of infected times the constant rate. And again, we get the mean field of this by following the same process, by seeing how a certain population can change. And then we say, of course, that the population of susceptible nodes will gain 1 if an infected node will transform to susceptible, or we lose 1 if we lose a susceptible node. And we lose a susceptible node by this rate here, we gain a susceptible node by this rate here. So you can define these ODEs either as absolute numbers or concentrations. It doesn't have much difference. In general, you just have to take into account, can you see? So you just have to take into account like the concentrates here. So if you begin by defining these ODEs as absolute numbers, then for instance you have to divide this concentrate by the total volume, let's say, in order to get concentration concentrates. But the logic that you set up of these ODEs is the same no matter if you talk about concentrations or absolute numbers. So here there is also an extra feature of this system, that it's like the second equation is redundant with respect to the first one, because I mean the concentration of the infected nodes is just 1 minus the concentration of the susceptible nodes. So taking advantage of this fact, we can replace here xs as 1 minus xi at every time point. So at the end we just need to solve one ODE, and this is the final ODE that we need to solve, which we can, I mean, it's so simple that we can even do it analytically. And at the end, what is really interesting about the system is these systems is that if you can solve it analytically, then you can define thresholds. You can find the thresholds as far as it regards like the concentrates. Thresholds that decide whether your equilibrium state is going to be an epidemic or not. So you simply, based on your concentrates, decide if the infection is going to spread in the whole network or not. For instance, here in this system, if Ki, the infection rate, is larger than Kr, like Kr is, yeah, Ks is the same, then we're going to have an endemic equilibrium, no matter what the initial state was. So here we're going to have a spreading of the virus. And on the other hand, if it's smaller than Kr, then the system is gonna be a disease-free, is gonna have a disease-free equilibrium. So the virus is not dangerous. Cool. Any questions so far? No. Okay, so the common of these systems that we saw before is that both of them were well steered, which means again that everyone can interact with everyone, but this is not a valid assumption for real-life networks. I hope this is kind of, I mean, you believe it. You believe that in Facebook, not everyone is a friend with everyone else. In Twitter, the same. Like in the World Wide Web or the internet, there is a topology, there is a clear topology, and if you want to study the dynamics there, you have to care about this topology. You can't say simply that any agent, so agent is just a node of these systems, but any agent can interact with any other agent, because of course what you're gonna decide about this dynamics is not gonna be right. It's gonna be based on very wrong assumption. So if you want to see, for instance, in Facebook or in Twitter, whether a post is gonna get viral, you have to care about taking somehow the topology into consideration. You have, I mean, it's much different. The probability that your post is gonna get viral is much higher if you're close to people that have many other friends, for instance, right? Because one of them can spread it to many, many other people. Then this probability is, of course, much higher than being isolated in some corner of the web and no one transmitting your post, retransmitting your posts. So yeah, the strategy for you if you want to get famous in Twitter would be, for instance, to get connected to large spreaders. Or for instance, like, yeah, I mean, so this is sexual contact network. I like this picture a lot. So it's kind of the same argument, right? So in most of the societies, not everyone goes to bed with everyone else. So if you want to study the epidemics of a sexual transmitted disease, you have to care of capturing the topology in this network as well somehow. And by the way, many people are interested in this. Many people are interested in studying dynamics of HIV or of other sexually transmitted diseases. There are many, many other examples. Financial networks is another one. Companies usually form clusters. And then what an interesting dynamic process would be here would be, for instance, to study what happens if some of companies at some time point they get bankrupt, or what happens with the product, with the new product trends in the market, right? Many, many other examples like gene networks that we have seen so far, chemical reaction networks. This well-steerness assumption that we have seen doesn't hold most of the times. And that's why it's much harder than what we have seen so far to approximate the dynamics in chemical reaction networks. Or even the brain. I mean, the neurons in the brain have a certain topology, and maybe certain diseases that have to do with the brain are based on this topology. Okay, so I hope I convinced you topology is important. And now let's talk about how to formalize such systems, how to make our discussion a bit more formal. Each of these nodes here is an agent, and we said an agent can be in some state, the set of the states you have of your system you have to define beforehand, of course. Here we're gonna study the SIS system again that we have studied so good so far, but given a certain topology like this. Okay. So what do we have to consider? We have to consider a graph, right? Like the first idea of how to include the topology into your computations is to consider a graph like this. So a graph is usually defined like G equals V, E, L, where V are the nodes or the agents of this network, and E represents the set of edges of the connections between these nodes. And what is important is that each node has a certain state. Here it's visualized by a color, and this state is what we said, like a particular state from a state set. Here the state set equals S, comma, like all the possible states that a node can take. So formally L is just a function from V to this state set S, yeah, where S is what we said here, a set of all possible states. Cannot write well. All possible states. So for instance, the set of individuals here is what we wrote before. S equals S, I for the SIS model. So what happens now is that interactions among certain agents happen over time. And of course, the states of these agents change as a result of these interactions. So the rules are the same that we have seen so far, but the rules now refer to a certain instance, to a certain contact between two certain nodes of this network. So a rule now is that this node and this node, let's say this node is infected, this node is infected and this node is escapable. These two nodes interact, and then this one becomes infected. This would be an activation of the rule in our context now. So a blue, which is escapable, and a red, which is infected, interact and give us two infected nodes. Or an infected node spontaneously recovers. Okay, so we want to model this over time, right? How can we capture the dynamics? I mean, how can we formalize the stochastic process that happens? So a general way is to see this dynamic process the way we have seen it so far as a continuous time Markov chain. But the continuous time Markov chain now is not going to be a vector of some populations as it was so far. Rather, it's going to be the whole graph, right? If we want to care about the topology, we have to care about the whole graph. So this thing here, and this thing here, and this thing here are all states of Markov chain, of continuous time Markov chain, right? Of course, it's huge. but let's see what we can do. So, what's the size of the state space of this Markov chain? Does anyone have an idea? So let's say we have, so we said S is the set of different states and V is the set of nodes. So does anyone have an idea what's the size of this Markov chain now? Well, it's like, since each node has the number of S, the population of S, different states to B, and we have the number of the population of B as the number of nodes, then the total size of the state space will be S to the V, right? So each node can be in S different states. Here, S, the population of S is just 2, and then we have V of such nodes. So if V is n, in our example we would have 2 to the n number of different colored graphs, right? And this is the size of our CTMC. Yeah. The fact that this state space is so huge makes it, of course, infeasible for any possible numerical approach for the solution of the CTMC. Like, numerical approaches are the ones that we have seen so far, like solving the master equation. I mean, that's what I mean by numerical approach here, actually, solving the master equation. Yeah, but here we can't do because the state space is so huge. So, but still, one could say, why not to simulate? Yeah, and I would agree. Okay, why not simulate? Let's try to simulate. So, how we simulate? We simulate by CTMCs, we simulate by Gillespie algorithm, right? The difference, as we said here, is that the state of the CTMC is this whole stuff. And now this is gonna make a difference on how we consider the rule. So far, each rule was defining also one rule was defining always one transition. But here, since the rule is defined as the interaction between a certain pair, here it's pair of states, then what we have to decide is which rule is going to get activated, but we also have to decide at which pair this rule applies, right? And that's how we're going to decide our transition for the next state. So we have to do these two things, deciding the rule and deciding the pair of states that this rule is going to apply to. So, putting it a little bit more formally, what we have to do is compute for each rule Rj. So, the rules for us are the same here. S plus I goes to 2i, I goes to s. Let me not try it again. So, for each rule Rj, for j belongs to, let's call j capital, all the set of different rules that can happen. And this, let's say the constant rate of each rule is lambda j, but its actual rate of the rule is gonna be what? We said we have to take into account all the possible matchings, right? That can happen. So, if we have a set which is like matches, let's call it matches of the rule Rj in graph G, which means actually finding all the possible matchings that the left hand side of the rule, so for instance an S plus I node can be applied in an instance of the graph. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these possible matchings because we have 5 SI edges. And of course, the total rate of the rule is gonna depend also on the number of these matches. So the more choices we have to match our rule in a certain network, the more probable the rule is gonna become, right? So the actual rate at the end is gonna be lambda j times the population of this set. And yeah, this we have to do beginning for a certain state. Of the Markov chain. But we already said that a state of the Markov chain is nothing else than a certain graph, right? So for a given state, not for each, rather for a given state. X equals a certain colored graph, then we compute all the possible rules. And this is the transition rate for each of these rules, the actual transition rate. So after we have computed this for the state X, then we can compute, of course, the exit rate, as we have done so far, by just summing all the possible rates. Right? And using this number here, we know that the sample waiting time is what? Is exponentially distributed. Handwriting is awful. With parameter minus alpha 0x, like the negative of the exit rate. We have to choose where to jump with probability alpha jx, like simply the probability of the rule by the total, like the rate of the rule, sorry, by the total exit rate. But so far not much is different than the normal CTMC. We have our rules, we have computed this way the rates of the rules, we computed the exit rate, the total rates of all the rules, we have computed the waiting time as exponentially distributed, we have computed which rule we are gonna take, so which is a jump that we're gonna do. But now we have to choose also which match is gonna happen for this rule, right? So what we decide here is like whether a node is gonna get infected, a susceptible node is gonna get infected, or an infected node is gonna get susceptible. But for each rule that we have chosen, like for the rule that we have chosen, we have to decide also where to apply the rule, right? So that we have the next instance of our graph. So here we have to do this just uniformly by choosing, choose match rule, sorry. So we have to choose a match from this set in matches Rj, G with probability. This we do uniformly, just like we choose each match with the same probability. Okay. And since we know which rule is going to apply, which set of agents is gonna be influenced by the application of this rule, then we know the next state of our system. The only thing we have to do is to update our system, and of course to update our time by this, by adding the waiting time we have computed in this step, right? So the above simulation method is also sometimes called rule-based modeling. The fact that in addition to the rule, you have to choose also the margin. Okay. So since we can simulate, I have run some simulations for a certain network and given initial conditions for the SIS model. So strangely here, I is the green and S is the red one. So we see that in this trajectory, the infected nodes prevail in the network. So we have a spread of the disease, but still it's just one simulation. So we're not sure that this indeed happens. I mean, this really reflects the behavior of the system, right? So the problem with simulations is that in order to get statistical safe results for the estimate that you're interested in, you have to do many, right? You can't run one simulation and then say, okay, I get, after time point t, I get the infected nodes to be 70%. No, this comes from one trajectory, and one trajectory is a stochastic is a stochastic trajectory, is a stochastic sample. So in order to be safe, you have to do many. How many you decide by methods which are defined by confidence intervals and so on and so on. But the thing is that a number of simulations is not enough. So, and of course, each simulation costs, and here the cost is also larger than in normal CTMC. Like the cost of each simulation is larger than normal CTMC because of what we said, that apart from the rule, you have to search also the possible patterns where you search for the margins of this rule. And this costs, of course, extra time. And plus the fact that the larger the state space usually, and here it's really huge in the general case, then the more simulation runs you need in order to get statistical validated results. So simulation is a solution, but it's an expensive solution. So what about coming up with some other methods in order to approximate the dynamics of this network? But before I do this, I would like to discuss a little bit about some of properties of these networks and some of common features that many of networks of our lives and many of topologies of networks of our lives have in common. What is of huge interest also in this community is how these networks are getting shaped. So of course there is some stochasticity there, but for instance, if you think about Facebook or let's say World Wide Web, I mean, it's not completely random, right? I mean, the formation of these networks has followed some rules over the history, over the time history. I mean, I'm not sure what these rules were, but for sure there were some. For instance, like when we had many nodes together, like clusters, it was a safe decision that other people would go there and put, let me put it roughly, like put their networks close. So in the sense, in the formation, a general rule in the formation of many networks is that most of the people don't want to be isolated. Most of the people want to be connected to some central parts of the network, to some clusters of the network. Okay, so we can distinguish between network types. Of course, there are like common features, but not all networks of our lives have exactly the same, have all the features in common. So some distinguish that you can do first is between a static and a dynamic network. A static network, you can see it as a probability distribution over a graph space, usually having fixed the number of nodes or the number of edges. So you have some number of nodes and you have some number of edges, but approximately, but you don't know which edges you have exactly. So you decide these edges by a certain probability distribution, but this network topology doesn't change over time. You assume it stays the same over time. Or it can be dynamic, which reflects much better the reality in most of the networks that we have. And dynamic means that you want to have a dynamical process that describes this network growth via the addition or removal of nodes or edges by a set of rules. This set of rules, of course, is different than what we have seen before. Before we wanted to study a certain process on a fixed network. Now I'm talking about how a certain network is getting shaped. But of course, this type of networks, dynamic networks, are harder to study because because of the coevolution of the network's dynamics and the topology. You have to care about these two things simultaneously, right? And mathematically, this is a bit harder. But nevertheless, they shed more light on the foundation of the network, and they're usually much more realistic than the static ones. So based on the degree of the network, there is something which we call degree distribution, and it's just like what's the probability of a certain node to be of a certain degree. And this is like a characteristic that is used always. It's like the first characteristic that you look when you consider such a network. And based on this degree distribution, we distinguish the networks in two categories. The first one is assortative networks, and the second is disassortative networks. The assortative networks are networks where nodes with high degree tend to cluster together. So if I'm a node like with 1,000 neighbors, then I'm going to be close probably to other nodes that have many neighbors. On the other hand, disassortative, on the contrary, is the networks where the nodes with high degree are connected with low degree nodes, like a star topology, for instance, right? Okay. This we can visualize by taking a measure which is called the degree of the nearest neighbors. We write k nearest neighbors of node I, and then this is just like the average degree of the neighbors. The neighbors of I are in this set of so we have the average degree of the neighbors of node I, 1 by ki, because ki is the degree of node I, so the number of the neighbors, times the sum of the degrees of the neighbors of node I. And this gives us what I said, the average degree of I's neighbors. And if we average this measure now for all nodes of a certain degree k, then we get 1 by nk, which is the number of nodes of degree k in the network. And here we have the sum of all these things. So this portion here reveals what's the average degree of a neighbor of a node that has k degree. Is it clear? Okay. And based on this measure here, we can visualize whether network is assortative or disassortative, basically plotting this thing here. So here we have the degree of a node, and here we have this measure that reveals what's the average degree of the neighbors of a node of degree k. And we see that in assortative, like nodes with high degree tend to be together with nodes with high degree, and on the other hand, this assortative case, nodes with high degree tend to be together with nodes of low degree. I'm a bit slow and I'm afraid I'm not going to say a lot of things. Okay. A similar measure is to say whether a network is uncorrelated or correlated. So we say that the network is uncorrelated when we pick a node of a certain degree, and then we pick a neighbor of this node. Then the probability that the neighbor is of a certain degree does not depend on the degree of the node itself. This network is called uncorrelated. So we cannot find correlations, as we did here actually in assortative and disassortative networks. We found correlations between degrees of connected nodes. But in an uncorrelated network, you cannot do this. In an uncorrelated network, approximately the average k and n, like this one, for every node k is the same. So if we wanted to plot here an uncorrelated network, for instance, like the plot would look something like this, just a straight line, because no matter what k is, like k and n of k is approximately the same. Okay? Of course, I mean, here it can be deviations. I mean, it can be that you have a point here, another point here, and so on. But if you want to do a linear regression, for instance, then what is describing this, the behavior of this plot in uncorrelated network is just a line. Okay. I'm slow. So I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, briefly I'm gonna say how one can compute this probability in an uncorrelated network. It's the probability that we said that you have a node of degree k, and then you're interested in the probability that the neighbor of a random neighbor of this is of degree k prime. And this probability does not depend on k, we said, in uncorrelated networks, right? But, so one could say, okay, here I can remove k, and then I have the probability of k prime, which is the probability of a node to be of degree k prime. But if you think about it a bit more carefully, what this probability expresses is not exactly the probability of a node to be of certain degree, because what you do is essentially you begin from a node of degree k, and then you want to compute the probability that a neighbor is of degree k prime. So essentially you sample an edge of the network. You don't sample a node of the network and question about his degree. You sample an edge. And when you sample an edge, it's more probable that you end up in nodes with high degree. Right? Does it make sense? Mm. So it's not the same probability as the degree, and we can compute it in uncorrelated networks. We can compute it just considering this ratio, like which are the number of edges that end up in a K prime node by the total number of edges. And the total number of edges of the network is E, right? And the number of edges that end up in a K prime node is the number of nodes that have K prime degree times K prime. And this one would give me the total degree of these nodes, of the nodes of degree K prime, right? I sum over all nodes of degree K prime the degrees. But this way I have counted twice the number of edges, so I have to divide by 2 as well. And this way we can compute, like by replacing here nk prime as pk prime times n is the total number of nodes. We can simplify a bit and we can compute this probability that we were searching here for an uncorrelated network. So maybe this you find a bit boring, but this probability we will need afterwards if we have time to define some equations. But I doubt this. Okay, what else is of importance is to check whether a certain network is clustered or non-clustered, as we said before. And for this we also have certain measure. The measure is this one here. It's called clustering coefficient for a node I, let's say. And what expresses is what's the number of edges between the neighbors of this node. I mean, so this node has a certain degree, has, let's say, 4 neighbors here, but what we're interested in is the connections among these neighbors, not the connections between the node and the neighbors. To see the cluster is what we're interested in is only the connections among the neighbors. So here the clustering coefficient is 0 because we have no connection about the neighbors around the neighbors of I, right? But here the clustering coefficient is 1/2 because we have like 3 connections for the neighbors of node I from the total number of connections of 6. So all the possible ways to connect these 4 nodes is 6. And thus the clustering coefficient is here 1/2. And here where we have all edges between the neighbors, the clustering coefficient is 1. Right? So formally this is the formula. It's the number of edges, EI, between the neighbors of I by the total number of edges between the neighbors of I. And the total number of edges between the neighbors of I is Ki times Ki minus 1 by 2. Because if you have Ki nodes, the maximum number of edges between these nodes is given by this number, Ki times Ki minus 1 by 2, because it's like, you know, right? It's combinatoric. It's like for the first node you have K minus 1 possible edges. For the second node you have plus K minus 2, so K minus 1 plus K minus 2 till 1, and then this sum gives me this term here. Okay. So the average clustering coefficient is simply the coefficient, like 1 by n, like the average clustering coefficient of the network is the sum of the clustering coefficients of all nodes by the number of nodes. And this clustering coefficient shows on average exactly what we said, how much clustered a network is. So there are many other measures. I don't want to extend too much. They include, for instance, like closeness or between centrality. Close and centrality has to do with the total distance of the neighbors, of the nodes of a network. And between centrality has to do with how much central a node is in the sense of how many paths they pass from these nodes, from this node of the network. So it's like whether this node acts like a bridge for the network. So if you remove it, you might, in the worst case, for instance, form two strongly connected components. What's the importance of this network, of this node, for the connection of the network? Let's say. Okay, so let's see some of these networks. Erdős-Rényi random graph is the simplest one. So this guy is Paul Erdős. I would like to say some things about him, but now I don't have much time. He was one of the most productive mathematicians he was probably the most productive mathematician of the last century. He wrote more than 1,500 papers, and by many people he is considered the second best mathematician of all times after Euler. Nevertheless, he was known also for many other things, like for his particular personality, let's say. He used to have he was really funny guy in the sense he used to have his own vocabulary for many things. For instance, he was calling like children as epsilon, or he was calling women as bosses and men as slaves, and so on. He never got married. The rumor says that he was asexual, so his only satisfaction in life was maths. Anyway, all this I say, I mean, the conclusion probably is that being genius is not always I mean, don't complain too much if you're not a genius, it's okay. So together with Rényi, a French mathematician, they came up with the simplest random graph, which is the following one. So you have a set of nodes, and what you do is, initially the graph has no edges, and what you do is, for each pair of these nodes, you say I have a probability P where I connect them. Okay. So, of course, the larger the probability is, the more connected the network is going to look at the end. So here you can see we have just a probability of 0.03, and all these are instances of this random network with such a probability. So it looks already well connected, even though the probability is really small, right? Of course, I mean, as we said, it's always interesting to look at the degree distribution of a random graph. So for instance, here, what would be the degree distribution for such a graph? Does anyone have an idea? Actually, it's here. Okay, it's gonna be binomial. And why it's gonna be binomial? It's because simply of the formation of the way we form the graph, and the way we form the graph is, we said, for let's focus to one node for which we're interested for his degree. And what we do, we have one node, so n nodes in total, n minus one other choices. And for each of these possible choices, we have a probability to connect to this, which is p, which sounds like we do an experiment n minus 1 times with probability p, right? And this sounds like binomial. And the formula for binomial should be kind of known. So n we have said. So it's a probability of a certain node to be of degree k. It's all the possible ways to choose k edges out of n minus 1 times the probability to choose these k edges times the probability not to choose the other n minus 1 minus k edges, right? So this would reflect the probability that we have k concrete edges coming out from this node, and this is all the possible ways to get this k edges, right? And this binomial formula, the expectation of binomial is the same as the average degree of the network, and this is n minus 1 times p, and the variance of the binomial, I don't remember by heart, is n minus 1 times p times 1 minus p. Okay. So binomial distribution is known to converge to a Poisson distribution. When n is large and the average k is small, which is kind of equivalent for this probability not to be too large. And then, for instance, like this is how a Poisson looks like. Poisson is also a discrete distribution, right? So this is a Poisson for lambda equals lambda equals 1 with a small rate, and let me use another color. Sorry. Looks somehow like this. For lambda equals 4, and then I don't like this scheme. I will do it better afterwards, probably. And then, like, as the parameter of the Poisson gets larger, then the Poisson shifts on the right, but also looks more like, approximates much better binomial. And the formula of the Poisson is P of x equals k equals lambda to the k by k factorial. Okay, so after some lambda, we can say that a Poisson is a good approximation for a binomial distribution when n of the binomial is large and k is small. Okay, so we saw the distribution of an Erdős-Rényi random graph, but this is a distribution of a simple random graph, the simplest actually, but it's not a distribution that you expect to see in reality. So it's not a distribution that you expect to see in real networks, and this is mainly because what we said in the beginning, that real networks have some rules that develop. These rules have, of course, some stochasticity, but it's not that we just have a number of nodes and then we connect them randomly, as we do for the random graph, right? So it's intuitive that most real networks don't have such distribution. Rather, what happens in reality is that most networks have, many networks in real life have a distribution which is called power law. This is a distribution which looks like this. So here is K, and here is P of K. And this is just the log-log plot of the probability distribution. And the characteristic of this distribution is that it has a really heavy tail, which means that intuitively means that there are many nodes. This is the probability of a degree. There are many nodes with small degree. So here is K, so this degree is small, and we see the probability is high. So there are many nodes in a row with small degree. There are some with a bit more, and then you have a really heavy tail. So until a really large number of degree, there is still some probability. Not large but small, but there is still some probability that you have nodes of such large degree. So these nodes here are not many, there are few, because the probability is small, but they exist. And these nodes with such a huge degree, they are called spreaders, right? And no matter if there are not many, they seem to play a huge role, as we said also in the beginning, for the dynamics of the network. Exactly because they can influence many people. Where can I plug it out? Okay, so formally a power law distribution goes till infinity. So it's formally it's continuous and it goes till infinity, and of course the degree distribution is discrete. But of course, we can always approximate a discrete distribution from a continuous one, and then cut it also at some point after K max, because in practice there are no nodes of infinite degree. The probability density function of this distribution is this one here. Yeah, and it has nice properties such that for some parameters gamma, between 1 and 2 for instance, gamma is the exponent here, the mean, the average of the distribution is infinite. And for other parameters gamma, like for gamma between 2 and here should be inequality, yes, 3, the variance is infinite. The fact that the variance is infinite reflects what we said before, that this tail is really huge. And the probability is so spread that it doesn't have a finite variance. So usually we consider the log-log plot for easiness. And yeah, there are many examples in the real world that have this probability distribution. For instance, the word frequency in books has this probability distribution, which means like there are some words, there are many words, yes, there are many words that yes, there are many words that are not used often, and there are much less words that are used often. I mean, probably it's not right that I'm saying. No, it has to do probably with the connection between words. Okay, let's forget about this example. Yeah, it's easier to talk about citations, for instance. Like, yeah, so this one I know, I think. It's the number of citations that a paper can have, which means there are many papers that do not have many citations. Like, you know, in research this happens a lot, and there are few papers with a lot of citations, right? Or the hits on a website. I mean, most of the sites don't get many clicks, but still there are a few sites which get a lot of clicks. Or the earthquake magnitude. Like most of the earthquakes are small ones, right? Most of the earthquakes are small ones, like 2 or 3 Richters. But there are also few earthquakes that are quite strong. And believe me, there are many examples where this power law seems to fit quite well. So, yeah, we have seen some degree distributions. We saw in the beginning how we can simulate a certain network for certain dynamics, but we also said the simulation doesn't always work because it's slow. So at this point, I would like to give you an alternative of what one can do in a case where simulations are not useful. So what we need actually is some kind of abstraction in a more rough level. So if you consider the whole topology, then you're kind of lost. You have to do simulations, and if these are expensive, you can't do them. So what you have, what's the alternative is to care about the topology, but not considering the whole graph. Rather doing a certain abstraction, taking into account, for instance, the degree distribution that we saw before. So of course, there are many different graphs which have exactly the same degree distribution and won't behave the same. But at least taking for the beginning the degree distribution into account will give us a good approximation. And how we do this is called degree-based mean field. Like in the word mean field, we also added towards degree-based, which means now you have to consider one ODE equation for each different degree of the network. So which are the variables now? We are going to consider again the SIS model. Okay. We need to consider one ODE for each degree and of course for each possible state. Like, let's call XSK the fraction of nodes of degree k which are susceptible, and xik the fraction of nodes of degree k which are infected. Since the number of nodes of degree k is constant, we can do, I mean, we have a redundancy again here, so xsk is going to be 1 minus xik, right? So if a node of degree k is not infected, it's going to be susceptible. And what we want to do now is to set up an ODE system for this equation, for these variables, which means which is going to look like this. So for every k, we need to consider the derivative of excess k, and this is going to be write it and then I'm going to explain. Okay, so this is the ODE, and why this is right. So we have again the same rules, but now you have to consider also the degree of a node. So this means that the number, let's say we're not talking about fractions, let's talk about numbers, like to get the intuition better, even though it's the same, no matter if you write fractions or populations here. But so the number of nodes which are susceptible and have degree k is gonna get increased if a node which is infected and has degree k becomes susceptible. This is the rate that it becomes susceptible. Or is gonna decrease if a susceptible node of degree k becomes infected. And what's the rate that this happens? So far we were writing like this, this rate is xs times xi, because we were assuming that everyone interacts with everyone. But as we said, now this is not longer true. So we have to approximate a little bit better the portion of the neighbors of this node here, which are infected. And we approximate this portion by this, like k times this probability. K is the total number of neighbors of this node, and this probability is the probability that a node of degree k has, that a random neighbor of a node of degree k is infected. Okay? So what is missing actually in order to define this ODE system is to define this probability here. So it's much easier if you define this probability the way we did it before for a non-correlated network. So assuming this does not depend on the degree of the node. And we do this as following. Okay, so where is does for the uncorrelated case, this is gonna look like. Okay, so what we did here. Once more, we want to find the probability that a random neighbor of a node of degree k is infected. So let's sum up simply overall possible nodes, overall possible degrees that this node here can have. Let's sum up overall possible k prime. And then we need here the probability that this node is of degree k prime, given that his neighbor is k, as we had before, times the probability that, given that this neighbor is of degree k prime, is also infected. And if we sum up overall possible k prime degrees for the neighbor, then we should have this probability, right? And the good thing is that this is nothing else than x ik prime, because I mean the probability of a node to be infected given that his k prime is the fraction, equals the fraction of nodes of degree k prime which are infected, which we have already defined. And this probability here for the uncorrelated case we have already computed before, right? We did it. And at the end we can compute overall this probability, which gonna give us sum overall k prime this comes from the previous proof we had, and here we have x I k prime. Okay. Nice. And we see that this expression here is independent of k. And that's nice because it makes directly our ODE system solvable, because this one does not depend on k anymore. We have everything we need, and here we have only this variable that we can write 1 minus x is k from here, and then we can get the solution of our system for each, solving one ODE for each degree of the network, right? And then after we have the equation, we can study equilibrium properties. And then we can see, like, we can find thresholds for the epidemics and the probability that the epidemic prevails or not. Okay, so I'm finishing. I haven't managed to tell you all I wanted to tell you, but I will briefly go to the last part, and then, I mean, if you're interested, you can read it on your own. So the thing is that this works well for many cases. This ODE system, which is called degree-based neutral discovery, works well for many cases, but there are other cases that doesn't work. Especially, it works well for well-connected networks, but it often performs poorly on sparse networks. sparse networks are networks with not many edges, and the reason for this is that, for instance, like a typical example of a sparse network is like a lattice. So you have a constant degree for each node, like let's say 4 lattice. The 4 lattice has 4 edges from every node, and then the thing is, it looks like a square, let's say. Yeah, let's say it looks something. This is a typical lattice. And then, I mean, since each node has the same degree, then it makes sense that you can't approximate the dynamics of the network just considering the degree, because then there is no difference among the nodes at all. But still, when you approximate the dynamics in reality of such networks, you see that different nodes have different probability of being infected, for instance. And the reason for this is that the position of the node plays a role independently of its degree. So a node that is here is much more probable to get infected because he has around more nodes, no matter if he's not connected to them or not. If he's surrounded by infected nodes somehow, at some point the infection is gonna reach him much easier than if he's isolated, right? So you have to add something more in your variables and to capture such cases. And what you add more is that you have a variable now which is like xsk, but it also has an m here, and this m comes from counting the number of neighbors of this node which are infected. So explicitly, you count the number of neighbors of this node which are infected, and the same you do for this. And you set up ODEs for this, which are more complicated. I wanted to show you, but I don't have time. But they're not so hard either. And yeah, one more comment is that now, so XSKM now is the fraction of nodes of degree k which are susceptible and have m infected neighbors. So from all nodes of degree k, count those which are susceptible and have m infected neighbors. And XIKM is the fraction of nodes of degree k which are infected and have m infected neighbors. But now the redundancy doesn't hold anymore for these variables. Do you see it? Because, I mean, this one is not 1 minus this. There are many other choices, right? So you have to solve now one ODE for each state, for each degree, and for each number of possible infected nodes, which makes the ODE system really, really large for a common network. And there you run into problems of computational time and so on. But at the end, if you manage to run this, you see that, for instance, for a 3 regular random graph, it's like a 3 lattice. This is the solution of the ODEs that I told you just now, that you can take, and this is called approximate master equation, and this is the mean field. So you see the mean field is far away from the real solution. On the other hand, AME captures really good what happens. And the same happens here, like if you try to, so this is the infected fraction, like I of t, the total infected fraction. And this is like the number, the fraction of SI edges. So how many edges are in the state SI from the whole network, and you see again that AME captures the dynamics much better than the simple mean field. But it comes with the increased computational cost. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to say. probably I'm gonna write the ODEs for the approximate master equation as well, in case you're interested to study further this nice topic. Okay, thank you.